Her pregnancy stained the family name. So her mother swapped the heavy-set girl to a huge cowboy for a single cow. Dustwater Crossing, Wyoming Territory. Autumn, 1887. The wind had teeth that morning, dry, sharp, and mean like the land itself. Dustwater Crossing wasn't much. A few weather-beaten shacks, a corral, and a yard where hopes were weighed and sold like meat. The sun had only just climbed the rim of the world when Edna Whitmore yanked her daughter over the hard, cracked ground. One iron hand held Leah's arm as if it were a rope that might snap. Leah Whitmore, 7 months along, shuffled beside her in a thin cotton dress that bit into her belly and thighs. The cold burned her cheeks. So did the shame. She kept her eyes down. She always did. Keep them eyes straight, Leah, Edna snapped. Ain't nothing here you got a right to be proud of. The market was already alive. Ranchers barked orders. Cattle bellowed. Pigs squealed. Traders shouted the price of rope, pots, and a bucket of bent nails. But the thing folks watched that morning wasn't stock. It was the round-bellied girl being hauled through the gate like a sow on the block. Whispers sparked. That Whitmore girl, the big one, knocked up. Her mama's fixing to get rid of her. At the far fence stood a man by himself. One boot on the lower rail. Arms folded across a chest like a barn door. He was a giant, well over 6 feet, shoulders thick as stacked logs, face shadowed by a wide hat. He didn't blink when Edna marched up. You Cullen Rayner? Edna asked, skipping manners like they cost money. He gave one slow nod. You said you'd take her. He looked past Edna at Leah. She kept her gaze nailed to the dirt. He said nothing. Edna let out a sour laugh. You're getting the better end, don't you worry. She eats like a hog and whines like a busted gate. But you'll get your cow. Behind them, a hand led up a gleaming black milk cow, calm and quiet on a rope. The man gave the animal a quick look, then turned back to the girl. She got a name, his voice came, low and steady as canyon shade. Leah, Edna said. Leah Whitmore, 20 years old, thick as a stump and carrying a bastard. No sense dressing it up. You want her, take her. You don't, I'll leave her by the creek and let the buzzards have the rest. Leah's knees shook. You got anything to say, girl? Edna barked. Leah opened her mouth. Only breath came out, breath in fear. She don't cook worth spit. Barely cleans. Cries at night like a babe and smells like potatoes half the time. If you want a womb for your empty shack, she'll do. Cullen stepped closer. For a heartbeat, Leah thought he might speak to her. Instead, he untied the cow's rope and handed it to a boy. She'll ride with me, he said. That's it. Edna blinked. He went on, voice even. You got your cow. The rest ain't your business. Edna's mouth tilted into a cruel smile. Well, ain't that a blessing? First time she's ever been worth anything. She spun away, without a backward glance. Leah stood frozen. Cold seeped through thin shoes and up into her bones. Faces turned toward her, some curious, some disgusted, a few soft with pity. But no one moved. No one lifted a hand. She's yours now, cowboy, someone called, laughing. Cullen didn't answer. He tipped his head toward his wagon. Leah moved, slow and stiff, heart slamming, gut twisting. She cupped her belly like she could block the world with both palms. When she climbed onto the wagon seat beside the giant, she whispered, barely sound at all, I'm not a thing. Eyes forward, he gathered the reins. No, he said quietly. Not to me. They rolled away in a curtain of dust. The wagon rattled across the rough prairie, wheels banging over roots and ruts. Leah shifted to the back, both hands holding her heavy belly, the weight of it pressing like a stone slab. Sweat mixed with grit on her dress. She did not speak. Neither did Cullen. He held the reins. With hands like shovels, shoulders broad under a faded coat, his face unreadable. The quiet wasn't mean. It just was like sky, like dirt. He seemed to have no wish to fill it with words that didn't matter. By late afternoon the sun sank toward the hills, painting rust and violet across the sky. They turned off the main track onto a faint trail that snaked through low rises dotted with scrub pine. A hawk circled once, then slipped behind a ridge. Leia squinted as a cabin showed itself, small but solid. The logs fit tight. The roof was patched and true. From the chimney, a thin breath of smoke coiled into the cooling air. A lean-to hugged one side, covering a wood pile and a half-built cradle. The fence ran straight. The gate still hung square. Cullen pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. "You can come in," he said simply. Leia hesitated, then stepped down. Her feet hit hard. Her back ached from the ride. Everything felt swollen and sore and not quite hers. She followed him inside. The place smelled like cedar and clean earth. One room, but ordered. A table with 2 chairs, a short shelf with a handful of books, a hook by the door for coats. The bed was plain, sturdy, blanket folded sharp at the foot. Near the window sat a small couch, worn but padded. "You can rest there," he said, pointing to it. She looked at him, unsure. "Where will you sleep?" "I'll sort it," he said, already turning away. She sank carefully. The cushion gave a tired groan under her weight. She kept her hands over her belly, shoulders tight, trying to take up as little space as a body like hers could. Cullen moved around the room with quiet purpose. He poured a tin cup of water and set it on the table beside her. Then he picked up a lantern and stepped outside. The door closed soft. That night she didn't sleep much. The couch was narrow. The blanket scratched. But it was the silence that felt strange, the kind without slamming doors, the kind without sharp words thrown like stones, the kind without heavy feet pacing just to prove a point. She lay still and listened to crickets and the faint crackle of a dying fire. She listened to her own heart and her baby's fluttering kicks and wondered if quiet could be trusted. Morning slid in pale through the window. She blinked against the thin light. At first she thought she'd dreamed the smell of food. Then her stomach roared. On the table, a plate, biscuits still steaming, eggs, a strip of bacon. Next to it, a tin of milk and a folded napkin. Outside, Cullen split wood, sleeves rolled, arms flexing with each swing. He didn't glance her way. He just worked steady. Leia stared. Her fingers twitched on her lap. No one had ever made her breakfast without a price, without a threat, without a remark about the size of her plate. She had always served in silence, always with shame. She rose slowly and waddled to the table. For a long breath, she only looked. Then tears came, quiet ones, surprised ones. She took a bite. The biscuit was warm and buttery and real. From the porch came the thud of the axe. Through the open window, she whispered, not sure he could hear, "Thank you." No answer. But the axe paused the tiniest beat before it fell again. Days settled into a gentle hush. She had expected something else, maybe orders, maybe cruelty, maybe the same old cutting jokes. Instead there was the soft tread of his boots every morning, the smell of coffee and fresh wood, and the simple grace of being left alone. He didn't speak much, but his calm filled the room like a steady beam under a roof. Solid, not smothering. One afternoon the front door moaned, that same awful groan she'd flinched at since she arrived. Leia looked over and found Cullen crouched with a wrench and a tin of oil, brow bent in thought. "That sound's been chewing at me," he said, to the hinge more than to her. She said nothing, only watched while he worked. With every slow turn, the noise faded until the door swung easy as breath. The next day the chair by the window, the one she used when her legs ached, had a folded quilt on the seat, and under it an extra cushion. She sank into it with a low sigh, her swollen ankles singing in relief. He never spoke of the change, But every small fix seemed to say, I notice. Not the way others noticed. Eyes narrowed, lips twisted, picking her apart like a thing to mock. Cullen never looked at her that way. His eyes met hers instead of dragging over her shape. He didn't ask about the baby. He didn't ask who had done what or how she'd been treated. He left room. And in that room, something tight inside her began to loosen, like a knot soaking in warm water. As the days turned, she found her voice in thin threads. One evening, while he sanded the cradle's frame, she spoke to the air. My daddy died when I was 8. She kept her gaze on the grain of the wood. He was gentle, used to sing while he mended fences. Said work goes faster when your heart's warm. Cullen's hands kept moving, slow and even, following the line of the board. He nodded once. When he passed, Mama changed. Leia swallowed. She said I looked too much like him. Called me soft. Lazy. Said no man would ever want a girl like me. The words hung heavy. He didn't rush to fill the quiet. He sanded, steady as a clock, his presence a kind of shelter she didn't know how to name. I slept in the barn sometimes, she went on, eyes burning, so I wouldn't hear her mouth. Winter was cold, but at least it was quiet. He stood, stretching tall, floorboards creaking under all that weight, and set the finished rail beside her with care. No pity, no speech, just respect. That night, supper tasted different. Not because of spices. Because she didn't hide. Her fork didn't shake. She even asked for a second helping. He passed the plate without a word. The next morning, she watched him fix the back gate. A breeze caught her dress. Panic pricked her skin. Old fear of being looked at, sized up, laughed at. Cullen glanced her way. Wind's picking up, he said, turning back to the hinge. Not a word about her shape. Not a look that stung. Just the weather. They sat on the porch that evening, the sun sinking behind the hills, the air turning soft and gold. Leia shifted, hands on her belly, eyes on the far ridge. Can I ask you something? Her voice barely rose above the crickets. He made a low sound that meant yes. Why don't you ask what happened? How I ended up like this? He leaned back, resting his arms on his thighs. Ain't my business unless you want it to be. She studied him. Don't you think I'm disgusting? The wind stilled. Even the grass seemed to listen. His brow pulled, not in confusion, but like something hurt. I see a woman, he said softly. One who's carried more hurt than most ever do. And she's still standing. Her throat closed. She could hardly breathe. He looked out over the land. You lived through things that would fold others in half. That don't make you foul. That makes you strong. She didn't speak. Inside, something long buried lifted its head, small, tender, unsure, but alive. That night she didn't grip the blanket as though it might save her. She slept open-handed. The next morning started like the others, quiet and steady. Smoke rose thin from the chimney. The thud of an axe came from the back lot. Leia was hanging herbs by the window when she heard hooves on the gravel. 2 sets. Not the wagon. Cullen was still behind the barn. She stepped onto the porch, palm pressed to her belly, without thinking. A man in a tan duster reined up by the gate. His horse blew dust. The man's hat tipped low. A smirk cut across his unshaven face. Well, I'll be, he drawled, sliding from the saddle. Thought folks were just making up stories. Leia took a small step back. She didn't know him, but the way his eyes skimmed her like she was a showpiece and not a person made her stomach ice. So it's true, he went on with a low laugh. The giant took in the fat sow. How's it out here, sweetheart? He feeding you slop or scraps? She didn't answer. His glance rolled over her body. Look at you. That belly's about to pop. You're a walking birth sack, ain't you? The cabin door opened. Cullen came out slow, wiping his hands on a rag, his jaw set hard. The stranger tipped his hat in a mocking way. Cullen Rayner. Never thought I'd see you as rancher and nursemaid. What's next, diapers and lullabies? Cullen's face didn't change. The man laughed louder. You could have had any number of gals in town. And you're out here playing savior to a walking butter churn. The big man moved, not quick, measured. He strode to the fence, planted both hands on the top rail, and with a sudden wrench tore a thick plank free. He slammed it into the dirt in front of the stranger's boots. The crack split the air like lightning. The man jerked back, eyes wide. You lost. Cullen asked, voice even as a level. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Then say it someplace else. The man squinted, smile turning mean. You gonna hit me with that board, Rayner? Cullen didn't lift the plank again. He reached out instead and laid his big palm on Leia's shoulder, gentle but sure. He didn't take his eyes off the other man. No one touches what I care for, he said. Not with hands. Not with words. Heat spread through Leia where his hand rested. Not ownership, not show protection. You're picking trash, the man sneered. Don't cry when folks spit in your face for it. Cullen didn't blink. He only looked, steady, unshaken. The stranger shifted under that look, the way a wild horse shifts when it senses a fence it can't jump. He swung up onto his horse with a huff. Suit yourself, he muttered, turning the animal. I wouldn't raise no child born out of shame. He kicked the horse. Hooves hammered the road, then faded into the hills. Leia trembled all over, but it wasn't fear anymore. Not exactly. She turned slow toward Cullen. You didn't have to say that. Yeah, he said quieter now. I did. No one's ever. Then let this be the first. His voice wasn't loud, but it rang in her bones. She looked down at the splintered plank in the dust. It wasn't a weapon now. It was a sign. Not to the world. To her. She wasn't alone. After that, the days softened. There was still a lot of quiet, but it no longer pressed on her. It wrapped around her like a quilt, thin in places, but warm. The quiet became a place where things could grow, slow and steady. Maybe trust. Maybe something near to it. He never demanded help, but he handed her tools more often and let his pace match hers. It wasn't just niceness. It felt like an invitation. Belong if you want. It started with herbs. These are yarrow, he said one morning, crouched by the shed where sunlight speckled the dirt. His voice was patient. Boil it for fevers. Dry the leaves for cuts. He pinched off a sprig and passed it to her, sap already sticky on his fingers. She knelt and let the earth press her knees. The leaves felt rough. Their smell was bitter. She stripped stems the way he showed her, tied little bundles with twine, and hung them in the rafters of the shed to dry in the warm shade. Her hands stained green, sap and dust, tiny flecks under her nails. She didn't mind. For the first time in months, she felt useful. Not just a belly waiting to burst, but a person living a day. The next day came sunflower seeds. Split these, Cullen said, pouring a mound of striped shells into a worn wooden bowl. Chickens like 'em small. Helps 'em chew. Leia carried the bowl to the porch and settled into the chair he'd patted for her. Her fingers found a rhythm. Crack, flick, drop. The seeds clicked like tiny heartbeats. The work was small and simple, but it steadied her. When she finished, he handed her a tin pail. Let's feed 'em. They walked to the chicken coop together. She waddled, hips wide, pace slow. He matched her without a word. The hens rushed them in a flutter of yellow and white, pecking at her skirts, tickling her ankles. Leia laughed, high, bright, surprised by the sound of her own joy. Cullen turned, the corner of his mouth almost a smile. You got a gentle voice, he said, watching the birds gather at her feet. She blinked. Nobody's ever said that. That evening, something waited on the porch, a rocking chair hand-carved from fresh cedar, the wood still warm from the sun. The back curved easy. The legs stood solid. She ran her hand along the arm. You made this. He shrugged one shoulder. Figured you might want a place to sit and watch the sky. She did exactly that. The sun slipped behind the hills and soaked the grass in honey light. When the wind rose, she reached for her old shawl, but before she could, Cullen stepped out and handed her a folded bundle. A new shawl, knitted by clumsy, careful hands, rough in spots, loops a little uneven, soft green streaked with brown and cream like ground after rain. You didn't have to, she whispered. I know, he said, and went back inside. Sleep ducked her that night, not because of hurt, but because warmth moved where winter had lived a long time. Under the oil lamp, she sat at the table with a new shawl around her shoulders and a needle in her fingers. Mama's voice once said she ruined every stitch. But her hands were steady now. By dawn she had a gift, a simple square of cotton, plain and imperfect, made with care. In one corner she sewed a single letter, C. She folded it and laid it by the bedding he'd made on the floor. No note. When she woke, he was already outside cutting wood. Around his thick wrist a strip of white stood out. He'd tied the little handkerchief there like it mattered. Leia didn't hide to cry. She let the tears run, quiet, clean. For the first time, she had offered a piece of herself, and it had been received without mockery, without a price. She wasn't just a burden anymore. She was part of something that felt real. The wind changed a day or two later. It carried trouble, thin and sharp as a blade. Cullen saw the dust first, a smear on the horizon. A wagon drawn by two dark mares. Beside it, a rider on a single horse. One man wore a long black coat and a high collar, the town preacher. The other rode stiff, a rifle slung behind, the sheriff. Between them, on the wagon seat, sat a woman with gray hair twisted tight as a knot. Edna Whitmore. Leia noticed the cloud of dust from a porch. Her hands stilled over the wash basin. Soap bubbles ran down her wrists like sweat. No, she breathed. Inside, Cullen sat at her shoulder. She went, heart pounding, belly suddenly twice as heavy. He latched the barn doors, drew the curtains, lifted a long rifle from the wardrobe. He set it down, not pointed, not raised, just ready. A knock came, sharp and impatient. Cullen opened the door halfway and filled the frame. Morning, he said. The sheriff spoke first. Got ourselves a dispute. Edna stepped up, skirts neat as if dust couldn't stick to her. Her eyes skimmed the room with disgust. My daughter, she said like the words were sour. I'm here to take her home. You traded her, Cullen said, face smooth. Edna's mouth pinched. I bartered temporary custody, not ownership. She's blood. She belongs with me. Where she's safe. The preacher cleared his throat. Might need town say so. A woman in her condition, living with an unmarried man. Cullen's voice cut clean. What does Leia want? They went quiet. Edna blinked. She ain't in a state to know what she wants. Cullen stepped aside. Inside, Leia had been listening. One hand pressed to her chest. The other cradled her belly. When he looked at her, she knew the choice was hers, no one else's. She stepped out slowly, every move careful but sure. Her dress was plain. Her hair hung loose. For once, her chin didn't dip. Mama, she said steady. Edna's eyes narrowed to slits. Don't mama me. You're coming home. Leia drew a breath that seemed to reach her toes. You sold me. Edna snorted. Don't be dramatic. I made a deal. You were eating us bare and shaming us besides. I had no choice. No choice. Leia's voice trembled, but she did not stop. You could have helped me. You could have asked who the father was. You never even wanted to know. Edna's gaze flicked to the preacher. I did what needed doing. You traded me for a cow, Leia said. The words cracked like a whip across the yard. I may be fat. I may be pregnant. But at least now, she went on, louder, someone sees me as a person. Not a burden. Not a price tag. Cullen stood behind her, quiet as a tall tree. The preacher shifted, his collar suddenly too tight. The sheriff studied the dirt. Edna's mouth opened, then shut. Color rose hot in her cheeks. Not guilt, something colder. You'll regret this, she hissed. That child, Leah cut in, eyes bright, will know she was wanted. Not traded. Not hushed. Not broken. Edna turned on her heel. Her skirt snapped in the wind. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't look back. She climbed into the wagon and snapped the reins. Dust billowed. The preacher offered a stiff nod and followed. The sheriff glanced at Cullen, then at Leah. He gave one respectful nod and rode away. When the hoofbeats faded into the hills, Leah leaned against the doorframe. Her breath shook. You did that, Cullen said softly. I finally said it, she breathed out. You can say it again, he told her. I'm not property, she whispered. I'm not shame. I'm not a mistake. He didn't answer with words. He simply stood beside her, a wall that did not need to be painted to be strong. Something shifted deep inside her, not fear, not grief, but power. It felt new, and it felt like it had always been waiting. That night the sky came apart. Rain hammered the windows. Wind howled through the eaves. Lightning split the ridge again and again. In the barn, a lantern glowed warm. The horses were calm, as if they knew. Leah gripped the edge of the blanket. Her breath hitched. The first pains had begun at dusk, low and tight. Now they rolled in hard, sharp waves, tearing through her like thunder. I think it's time, she whispered, tears already shining. Cullen was there in a blink. He had water ready, clean cloth stacked, the fire stoked high, the doors locked. You're safe, he told her, kneeling close. We'll do this together. She nodded and bit down as the next contraction grabbed her. The storm roared outside, but in the barn there were only a few sounds. Her breathing, the rustle of blankets, the beat of Cullen's boots on the floor as he moved, bringing towels, holding her hand, dipping a cloth, and laying it cool across her brow. I can't, she whimpered once when the pain climbed high and mean. You can, he said. You already have. His big hand pressed steady against her back, an anchor as she cried out. Breathe, Leah. Breathe through it. She screamed, a raw, deep sound from somewhere older than words. Sweat ran into her eyes. Her whole body shook. You're doing it, he whispered. Almost there. She pushed, once, twice, and something in her seemed to split. For a heartbeat, there was only quiet, like the world itself took a breath. Then came a baby's cry, wild, fierce, alive. Leah sobbed before she saw her. Cullen leaned back with a tiny bundle in his arms, slick with life. His face gave little away, but his hands trembled just a hair. He wrapped the child, checked her quick and careful, then looked at Leah. She's here, he said, voice hushed. He placed the baby into Leah's arms like he was setting down the last fragile thing on earth. Leah looked. Red skin, eyes squeezed shut, mouth open in protest, fists curled. Perfect. She's beautiful, Leah breathed, half laugh, half sob. Cullen crouched beside her on one knee in the hay, watching mother and child like he didn't want to break whatever had just been made. He didn't reach for the baby. He only said, this little girl, she's proof. Proof. Leah asked, tears still falling. That you lived, he said. That you fought. He wiped her temple with a clean corner of cloth. She's why no one else gets to write your story now. Leah held her daughter closer. In her arms wasn't only a child. It was the reason she had survived. Outside, the storm eased to a quiet rain. Inside, a new breath began. Leah was torn, aching, worn out, and somehow more whole than she had ever been. Word spreads on the prairie like a fire in dead grass. But this time the stories didn't carry filth. They brought questions. Then wonder. Then something like respect. It started in the general store. The blacksmith's wife saw them first, Leia in a plain dress that fit her full frame, cheeks warm with late sun, a baby pressed close to her chest. Beside her walked Cullen Rayner, huge as ever, sleeves rolled, eyes following Leia like she was the only map he needed. No rope tied them. No chain. Something stronger than both, devotion. They bought flour, a bar of soap, a sack of seed. They did not hurry. They did not hide. Leia smiled at the lady at the counter. Cullen gave a nod to the boys who used to spit when she passed. No one laughed now. Some still whispered, "Is it true he took her for a cow? Is it true she birthed in his barn?" But the way he held the baby while Leia counted coins, gentle, careful, proud, softened mouths, and shut others. They came to town now and then, just enough to be seen, to be real. Little by little, Leia Whitmore became a name people could say without curling their lips. Spring came. Behind Cullen's place the valley turned soft and green. Bluebells and wildflowers rose without asking anyone's leave. Love grew the same way, quiet, sure, not waiting for permission. There was no wedding day to mark on a calendar. No preacher. No crowd. Only the three of them, Leia, Cullen, and the baby with a hawk-strong cry and a grip like hope. They stood barefoot in the grass under a wide, old oak. Wind tugged Leia's skirt. Cullen wore the same shirt he worked in. Leia wore the shawl he'd knit by hand. He took her hands. She kept his gaze. They said what mattered, the kind of words that don't need witnesses. "I see you," he told her. "I believe you," she answered, thick with feeling. He kissed her then, no rush, no show. The careful kind of kiss you give a thing you once thought you'd never find. Their daughter cooed against Leia's chest, as if agreeing. They sat in the shade later and ate honey biscuits. No music. No speeches. Just wind in the branches and a woman's laughter. Full free, not sorry for its own sound. That night in a small cabin, the baby slept warm and clean, hair damp from the bath Cullen had drawn. The fire burned low. Stars blinked outside. Peace settled in, not like a dream, but like a room finally built right. Leia kissed her daughter's tiny hand and whispered to the soft dark, "You were not born from shame, my love." Her voice shook, but she kept going. "You were born from choice. And love. Always love." Under a roof raised by hard hands, Leia learned she did not have to be smaller to deserve joy. She did not have to be quiet to be safe. She did not have to ask anyone to let her be happy. She only had to be home. And now she was. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel seen or reminded you that love can rise from hard ground, tap that like button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. We've got more tales of grit, heart, and the kind of romance that stands taller than dust, time, or bloodlines. Out here, love rides higher than legend, and no soul is too broken to be chosen. Stay wild. Stay warm. We'll meet you in the next story.